Welcome to New Game Plus. You're listening to a retro gaming podcast where three guys spend 7 days playing one old game and then we talk about it. My name's Dustin.
My name's Kenny.
Nolan.
And this is episode 303. And it is a director's episode. We got a very exciting special episode planned for you today. At the start of the episode, every once in a while, it is good to just get an update on what games we're playing. Often we talk about relevant video game news, but again, it's good every once in a while for us to just be able to talk and share a little bit about the games that we are currently playing, even if for one of us it hasn't changed in the last year or two.
I was going to say, yeah, I bet Kenny's is the same.
I wasn't saying any names.
It's not the same.
All right, listen. Other than the retro game of the week, which we play each and every week to varying degrees, what game or games have you been playing recently?
I'll go first. It's still Metroid Dread. I have been learning the speed run. I have a couple runs under my belt. My time is 1:48:43.
It's impressive.
Thank you. I've been playing that pretty exclusively. I've got D2 Resurrected on the back burner. Maybe that's not the word.
Back.
No, that's not the word. It's just like when I am done with the run, I'll fire it up and farm. So those are the two main games, and I'm flirting with this Path of Exile League that just started, but I'm probably gonna skip it just because too many games. But I just recently had the problem of no good games, and now I have too many good games.
Metroid Dread is one that I, too, have been playing. In fact, I beat it, 100% at it, and enjoyed that experience. And then yesterday, I tried to do a quicker run. Learning the speed run, not in the same sense that you are, Nolan, because I'm not built like that.
What here?
Yeah, I don't feel like you'll ever be a speed runner.
Oh, no.
Like, you just can't.
Hey.
You're right.
No,
They're a different breed.
Nolan, you don't understand. You don't understand because you are one of those. But seriously, it really takes a certain wiring of the brain for someone to be able to do that well.
You did it with my coaching, but you did it. You learned the speed run, which includes like 5 or 6 tricks that are not easy, and you did them with. By the way, I didn't see your game because you wouldn't stream it to me. I was having to guess what you were looking at and tell you what's wrong with. You did it, and you beat it under 4 hours in game time.
Yes.
Okay.
Can do it. No. I appreciate that. But Kenny and I are right in the sense of to be a good speedrunner, you have to be built that way.
You have to be built different.
Not everybody is built that way. Kenny is certainly not built that way. No. I am certainly not built that way. But regardless, I have been playing Metroid Dread and have been enjoying it. I also just played Return of the Obra Dinn. And
I have flirted with playing that game for a long time and never actually did. What'd you think?
Return of the Obra Dinn is a game that was created and developed by the same guy that did Papers, Please.
Yep.
So it's pretty much just a one-guy rodeo, and it is a game that I just recently have actually been trying to convince Kenny to play because it's one.
He was on a campaign this week.
Yes, I didn't even tell you, Nolan, because it's
literary.
It's kind of a point-and-click puzzle game. All done in like 1-bit old Macintosh graphics.
Old, but looks great. It looks.
And
good.
You guys are giving me whiplash. Like, you'll say something, and I'll be like, "Oh, I want to play that." Like, it's a puzzle game, and then you'll say the next thing, and you're like, "It's point and click," and I'm like, "Oh no, I got no desire whatsoever." And then you're like, "But it's like this beautiful old style, and it's fun and engaging." And I'm like, "Oh yeah," and then you're like, "But it's by the guy who did Papers, Please," and I'm like, "Oh no."
Oh come on.
That game was too much for me. I can't handle that.
Well, maybe you won't. I want you to try Obra Dinn. It's only $20, and it is a mystery, and it is a beautiful story, and it's one of those games where you know that the developer, one person in this case, you know that heart and soul is in this game.
Yeah.
And you can feel that when that happens. When a team does that, when an individual does that, you get that in like Hollow Knight, you got that in the Shovel Knight, you get that in Night, you get that in all the night games.
All the nights.
But then you also get it in these one person
Stardew
games. So, yeah. So Metroid Dread and I almost said Breath of the Wild coming soon. And Return of the Obra Dinn. Those are the two games that I've been playing, but I think Breath of the Wild is next.
Dude, I think it's this week because you beat Dread on under whatever. Unless you want to get all the artwork, you're gonna have to do it again. So, are you done with Dread and ready?
Because
you need to be ready.
I will keep coming back to Dread.
Fine.
Because I think it's an enjoyable experience, but I'm done with. I don't think I'm going to beat it under 4 hours on hard mode anytime soon. So that's not what I'm shooting for right now. So
Nolan's asking the wrong questions.
Okay.
If you're about to start a whole new adventure, we need to know like your state of mind. Where are you at emotionally? Where are you at, in your life in terms of commitment level to start a relationship with Breath of the Wild?
Is Breath of the Wild that much of a commitment?
How stocked is your pantry? You got a snack if you're gonna play for a real game. Like, these are the important questions that you guys always overlook, and I wonder if you're even gamers sometimes.
Then maybe I should skip that and just go to Hades. A lot less of a commitment.
I mean, I'd love to have you play.
Kenny,
Hades.
are you gonna let us know that you're playing DCSS or?
Yeah, you know the answer to this question.
Really?
I'm still playing DCSS because
he tried to deny it,
and I hate myself for it. And I'm playing D2R, but poorly because I get frustrated with that game and the way the economy works. So I just
Kenny, listen, live
acting as if like talking to people and trying to trade items is the same as real progression and farming, and it's not.
Him playing D2R is going on a trading Discord and bartering with other people for items and then regretting the trade he just made because it broke his build.
Yeah, but poorly.
That's not a game.
That's awesome.
That's not how you play a game. I mean, you can play that, I guess, but that's such a weird way.
Kenny, if that's
to play a game.
If that's your way to play ARPGs, I think PoE is always your game. It should be, but you don't play it anymore. The game's great at trading.
I'm waiting for 2. It is my game.
All right. I want Nolan to keep playing Metroid Dread because it's enjoyable to watch, and he's he's built like a speedrunner, so he can actually get some he can be in the running for records. I want Kenny to play Return of the Obra Dinn. Even if I buy it for you, I just want you to try it. Maybe you won't like it. Maybe you do suck.
I'm gonna try it. I just got to get to a place where I've got a minute.
No, what does that even mean? And for me, my list. I shared it with you guys, like Breath of the Wild, Tropical Freeze, Hades. There's a lot of games.
You gotta stream it all for us. That's the rule. But bring it on.
I'm overwhelmed because I'm just now coming back to the Switch for the first time in a while, and I have so many games to get to, and I just wish that I could play them all at the same time. But alas, I am not that talented. Like in our retro game of the week, Final Fantasy Legend 3. Okay.
Overview.
Final Fantasy Legend 3, or Saga 3, is a Game Boy game. All right? It came out in 91 in Japan, 93 in North America. And it was the final Saga game that we saw for a few years in the States. What's Saga? Good question. I don't know. I need to ask you guys. We played Final Fantasy Adventure, which is a Game Boy game that's not really Final Fantasy. It was actually Seiken Densetsu. It was the real name of it. It had like 10 names, so I don't know what to call it, but it was not in the Saga series, I'm pretty sure.
Final Fantasy like branched to 17 different places.
You can't do that.
Here's what they did, ultimately. They said Final Fantasy as a franchise is popular.
Right.
We're going to make other RPGs that have nothing to do with that, but we still want people to play with them. So we're just going to throw the Final Fantasy title on there and play with people's hearts and emotions.
Yeah.
And I'd say I don't appreciate it, but sometimes it works out for
No,
good.
that's exactly what they did. Like, I think they've admitted that. The translator for this game, Ted Woosley, was like this big name for Square. By the way, Square published and developed this game. And he was tasked with translating this game, and they were like, hey, we need you to do a good job because Final Fantasy IV's translation was a mess. And so this guy translated this game, Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger. Like, he localized all those games and clearly did a great job because we love all those games. So I thought that was interesting. He was behind this one. But you're right, Kenny. It's literally the brand name, and I think for Western audiences, they were like, slap it on there, it'll sell. And I guess it worked.
Yeah, this was the Saga series that they then referred to as Legends for the NA releases. But here's my question. Every time I see this word Saga written, it's like
lowercase
S-A-G-A, and it makes no sense to me, and I want to know why, and somebody explain it because it bothers me.
It stands for...
Oh, it's an acronym.
No, I don't know. But usually that's what the case is. If you got
it's aesthetics.
Suddenly awesome, good acronym.
It's aesthetics, but also those that are just listening on the podcast have no idea what you're talking about because you just spelled Saga normally.
I inflected.
He did finger movements to indicate lowercase a's.
They cannot hear finger movement.
Yes,
they could hear the capitalization in the way I said it.
Capital S, capital G, and Saga. I don't know if it. I don't think it's aesthetics. Okay, and I don't know much about the Saga series, but I do know that it's not Final Fantasy.
No.
And I will say this: I grew up playing a Saga game. What say you, Dustin?
What say you,
on the
Dustin?
PlayStation, there was a Saga game called Saga Frontier.
Yes.
And it was, if to my memory, it was amazing. It was incredible. It was wonderful. It was beautiful because it did feel like Final Fantasy, but it was completely its own thing. And it wasn't called Final Fantasy. It was called Saga Frontier. So by that time, they're like, okay, we'll stop playing.
It probably was going to be called Final Fantasy Frontier. And they were like, all right. No.
Oh, Final Fantasy Frontier. That sounds good.
Triple F.
No, but like, I think these are the three. This is the third one. The second one and the first one are the Final Fantasy spin-offs. After that, they went into Romancing Saga, Saga Frontier, other Saga stuff, but they didn't keep trying to, carry on the grift.
Yeah, and I feel like Square had this dilemma a lot in the 90s, and in the 90s, where they were like, Final Fantasy is by far the best-selling thing for us. How do we... And like, the Final Fantasy games aren't necessarily connected, but it's just the name, so you can't have 30 Final Fantasies, but they did that. I mean, I don't know. It bothers me a little bit.
The multiverse is a thing, and they could have just put chocobos in every single game, but they chose not to. And so really it's on them.
I'm gonna
chocobos are not the I'm going to choke,
No, they are.
They're not the defining characteristic of the series.
Moogles.
Moogles would actually be above that, but and Sid would be above that. But the differences between the Final Fantasy series and this Legends series are numerous. We'll talk about many of them, but one of the important things to note here, and what you can maybe connect and relate to because we played it as a part of the show, is that this series is a successor to Final Fantasy II. Not in story, but in mechanics, implementation. We played it, I believe that's the one... Is that not the one we played with Antonin? We played Final Fantasy II Dawn of Souls. I don't remember if we did.
Oh, yeah.
We played 4 with Antonin. Or no, I don't remember. But we played Final Fantasy II Dawn of Souls. And so you might be able to, if you can go back in your memory and remember because Final Fantasy II is very different from Final Fantasy I.
Experimental.
And it's also very different from Final Fantasy III and the rest.
Yeah.
And so it took that and it evolved you to move forward with that. So for those of you that have played Final Fantasy II, maybe some of what we talk about today, you can link that to that game.
Yes.
No, Link is a whole nother series.
Let me give you the story. 4 teenagers are saving. It's the same story.
The world in a crystal. There's no crystal.
There's no crystal that I know of. So no, I actually think the plot here is pretty cool. So there's this being that appears in the sky, this godlike being that is spewing water on the land and flooding it. It's not good.
You're right. That's real cool.
Let me continue. Monsters happen because of that. The way they do this plot is time travel. It's not Chrono Trigger style. It's not Zelda style, but there are time periods that you travel through in this game. because all of them are being affected by this thing, and you have to change events and you have to defeat enemies in order to get to this thing. And you're using an airship to traverse those time periods. And it's cool because there are characters you see in different time periods and they're different ages. So I think the setup here is pretty unique, especially, again, we're on Game Boy here, which is limited compared to like a home console. And that's the setup here. And I think it's pretty impressive. It's an impressive premise. I don't know if they delivered all the way because I didn't beat it, but we'll see.
Where do you guys fall on this fantasy and sci-fi mashing up, doing the the sci-final fantasy thing?
Well, I mean, I adore Chrono Trigger, and they did it best, I guess. I mean, I like it. I was surprised to start up this game and see the future stuff, like computers. I was like, where's my medieval sword and shield?
Well, your first battle is in a simulator.
That's crazy.
That's not often done in these fantasy games. And so that's one of the things that Saga series does. It goes more sci-fi because Final Fantasy, they've got sci-fi elements. There's a big blend, right? But they're very fantasy heavy for sure. They're not sci-fi games. They're fantasy games. This game does a major blend. It's like half and half.
I like it.
So if you like half and half in your coffee, then you might like Saga 3. Just as a reminder, this game was selected, handpicked by one of our most recent directors, Gamma Girl. And could have picked any game, but she said, hey, I've got a special fondness and a connection with this particular game on the handheld Game Boy, so want you guys to play it, talk about it. She's not here on the episode with us, but we're doing this in honor of Gamma Girl today.
Gameplay.
So out of the gates, Final Fantasy Legend 3 presents itself as a typical JRPG. And we've done this before. We've had this kind of conversation before with other JRPGs that pull the wool out from under your feet. There's an overworld map. There are villages. The villages all have the same shops in every other JRPG. Maybe even the same icons in the shop windows. So you know the armory, and you know the magic shop, and you know the item shop. All of that feels incredibly familiar. There are random battles, turn-based battles. All of that feels somewhat... boss battles.
Dungeons.
All of that feels somewhat the same. But then there are some major differences. Even between, and I think it's best to compare this to some of the JRPGs around its time, so some of the earlier Final Fantasies. One of the things that we talked about was this one being super sci-fi. Time travel, spaceships, cyborgs, robots, and more.
You're missing one of the most important distinctions, though, and that is that you can jump in this game.
Let's just talk about that for the rest of the gameplay section.
I would love that because I just jumped around everywhere, and it made me smile. It's silly. It's not actually important, but that's the heartbeat of this game.
They use it in dungeons.
Jumping over NPCs and jumping to puzzle. Jump.
It felt a little unnatural to me. I'm not going to lie. Not that it was like, oh, this game's bad because it has a jump. It's just like no other top-down RPG did that, and so I was just like, I forgot often that I have a jump.
Yeah, because this isn't an action RPG. It's not like you're swinging your sword and jumping and actually like battling with your guy on the icon. You're jumping into these, text-based fights. But I liked it.
There are a lot of mechanics that we need to break down here because they are different and unique from other games at the time. I guess one thing we could start with is like how it's similar, and I like that you brought up Final Fantasy II, Dustin, in that, and maybe there was something else I missed, but I think what you mean in that is in Final Fantasy II, one of the mechanics was leveling up your characters based on using specific abilities or magic spells, and they get better at that the more you use it. So you can highly specialize these characters instead of like they default level up, and so there's more of a like chore to it. Chore is a bad word, but in this game that's here as well for some characters where you use the abilities, and they get stronger as a result of using that ability. But
it's weird though because of the split. Some of your characters get that, but some of them have a typical leveling
traditional
experience,
level.
Which
it's a lot to
sounds
keep
confusing,
up with. Yeah.
But that's sort of just the first level of what your characters could do.
Right.
It gets really complex really quickly.
Yeah, it all depends on if your characters are eating meat or not.
Okay.
If they're eating robot parts or not.
Yeah.
They're not eating the robot parts. They're
they are.
presumably grafting them onto themselves.
Well,
No, they're eating all these things.
I don't remember the verbiage, but you're for sure eating the meat, because after I've gotten out of witch battles, it says, "Do you want to eat the witch's meat?" And I'm like, "No, not in particular."
Well, I said yes in my first play because I was like, "Wait a minute, that's a cool little mechanic. They're giving me a little health up. They're refilling my health after a battle instead of having to stock up on potions or go to town all the time." I was like, "Nice, that's a good mechanic for random encounters or like a high rate of them." Nope. Your character is now a beast.
A witch. Yeah, now a beast.
A different thing than it was before. And I was like, no.
And what's interesting, you brought up Final Fantasy II and talked about some of the leveling mechanics. Like, I believe that a lot of your characters, at least at the start, they have traditional leveling. So they get experience out of battles and then they level up. But depending on how your characters, your party transforms, evolves, de-evolves, they level differently.
Yep.
They are played differently. Their stats drastically change from what they originally were, which for some people might be an interesting thing to engage with, experiment with, but for me, it feels like that. Did we play a Digimon game recently? Digimon World? What did we play? Where there's charts and tables and stuff like that. That's what this felt like again for me.
Okay.
This is not as complex as that, but I can totally see the overlap.
It's complex for a Game Boy game, I'll tell you that.
Oh my
I was
gosh,
expecting a straightforward RPG. And here's the thing about that mechanic, Dustin. I hate it too, because it makes it. Yeah, you did. It disconnects me from the character and the character's progression and who this character is. I'm like, I liked this character before. Now it's a random beast. I don't know if that's optimal, like for that character. I don't know if that's a good decision or not.
Yeah.
And also, I don't want to be friends with the beast. I want to know this character and how this character is going to save the world and interact with other characters. It's like, I do not like it because of that disconnect.
I mean, you're not getting a ton of your character's story anyways, even if that's what it's looking for.
No.
I thought when I was jumping into these games that the difference between these is that they were more story heavy. And if anything, it was the opposite. This was more just sort of like RPG without that, which is fine for me. I will say the initial confusion of the whole monster cyborg, transformation thing was very confusing. They don't portray it well, but I was one of those who found it super interesting. And I feel like yes, they don't teach it to you well. Yes, if you're playing today, you're probably going to have to pull up guides on the whole thing. That's annoying. It's not a good thing. But I totally want to go and do a party and play the game in each of these styles. It gives a bunch of replayability and stuff to explore.
Okay, well, hold on. They don't explain it well. They don't explain it at all. There's not one.
Sure.
There's not one word about this system.
Right. The way you experience it is going, ooh, no. That's what happens. That's the flow of learning.
And it's not only one de-evolution. It's not that you just evolve into a beast. There are dozens of different beasts that you can transform into based on the elemental property of the beast that you're consuming, based on the elemental property of your current state, based on so many other things. And so without having a table to chart, you're just ending up wherever you end up.
It's almost 4 completely different systems you have to learn. You have to learn this beast system. You have to learn how your humans work in terms of their leveling and their items and the bonuses they get.
Yeah, this is a lot.
You have to learn how your mutants work and why they're your spellcasters and how to use your stuff to actually level up with them. And then you got to figure out how your cyborgs work and what items to equip on them. And the fact that items are the only thing that defines who they are and their stats. It's a lot.
5 times.
But absolutely.
Yeah, 5 party members.
It adds complexity that if you want stuff to explore and replayability and
endless.
That's your thing, it's super cool, but it's very hidden. It's not presented well.
Let me try to paint the picture just a little bit clearer, and then I know this is getting into the weeds here, but your party kind of starts split. So you're already not all just humans. You've got kind of half humans, half mutants, which your mutants are espers, which in Final Fantasy are your
summons.
your summons. That's another word used for espers. So they're the magic wielders, and then you've got your humans, which are more kind of the brute force fighters, you know. But picture that in the middle of this spectrum, and then if you eat meat, you can move to the left one, which is beast. And then if you continue to eat meat in certain ways, you can move to the left again and become a monster. And so go back to the middle, humans and mutants. If you eat parts, or Kenny says you're not eating them, you are putting them on your body. You become a cyborg, and if you continue to do that in the right way, you move one more step to the right and become a robot. But again, within each of those transformations, there's so many different kinds, and then each of those level and change differently. Some of them can have armor and weapons. Some of them can't use armor and weapons. Some of them gain experience through buying and consuming pills from a store, but others don't. It's just incredibly complex. So yes, if you want infinite replayability, yeah, it's there, but good luck.
And speaking of items and equipping them,
oh no,
we got a nightmare on our hands, boys, because the menuing here, again, you have a big party in a small screen.
Yeah, it's a Game Boy screen. Small. It's gonna be hard to do good menuing.
Well, yeah, but you have to guess. you have to
guess everything.
You have to guess what you're even equipping and where things are. It's pretty rough. I think they should have cut back.
Learn what goes where. They needed icons or they needed something, but it's not like those spots move. Your belt spot's always your belt spot. Your armor spot's always your armor spot.
But where's the belt?
You learn that quickly.
Okay. I think they should have cut back on the amount of things you can equip on a character, maybe, because it was cluttered. They had to use lowercase letters in some areas because uppercase were too big on the screen. Like some of them were uppercase, some were low. It's pretty rough, and itemization is really big for me in RPGs. I enjoy that aspect a lot. It's important, and so that kind of was just a flub for me. I was like, man,
should have just played a cyborg then.
But no, I don't like that. I don't want a team of cyborgs.
Here's the thing. I know I brought up Digimon World, and I'm bringing it up again because do you remember my conundrum there? I tried to raise my Digimon well, and I ended up with like the most worthless creature. And I felt trapped in Digimon World. That happened here. My main character turned into a rock, and like and its HP was less. And it's like, and then at that point, I'm like, why would I want to play anymore? Like, I've got a character.
Dustin, that surprises me. Are you not using a guide? I feel like this is the kind of game that you would use a guide for, and it would walk you through all those traps.
But there's no one path.
In both Digimon World and in Final Fantasy Legend 3, I'm using a guide and still end up with a rock as my character. So like, this is the kind of system we're working with. And Yikes. It's just tough to know all of the things. And Kenny, I'm going back to something you said earlier because you said maybe there's less story here. I feel like there's still a good amount of story, but there's less characterization is the key thing. Like
that's maybe more fair.
The story of the characters are not involving. The characters are flat. They really are just placeholders. They could be named anything because they're somewhat unimportant.
You kind of have to do that, though, if you're going to give the option of turning all of your characters into monsters as a valid gameplay.
You can't have
because you can't have 30 different
then what
lines.
are your monsters going to do? Yeah, have like human connection conundrums, and that be something that happens. So the fact that they had these complex systems, I think, means that they had to keep the characters pretty flat. But you're right, the world has some stuff going on. It throws it at you fast. It doesn't explain it super well. By the time the first sort of intro of all the stuff and character names was over, I was like, what in the world is going on? I guess I'll just play this RPG.
And I feel like the dialogue that they give you a lot, but it's not
slow.
It's not complicated. It's a little oversimplified dialogue, as is the case with a lot of these handheld RPGs, but it at least kept me on track with the story, and that's been a complaint of mine with Digimon World, actually, that there is no driving plot. They feed it to you, and then they're just like, that's it. We're not going to revisit it. In this game, at least it's kind of like, okay, the Talon, which is again the airship that you're using to travel, is like the centerpiece here of the story, and it's cool. Like you have a cool airship, and it's like the driving force here. But yeah, it's just a little flat.
The story is you got to get the Talon up and running so that you're even able to go between times. And eventually the Talon, I think to operate that thing, you put brains into it, and that helps to operate and control it. Like, there's a really cool sci-fi system here with the Talon, and with the story. I think it is story heavy because immediately you're having to get float from that cave so that you can float around the continent. You're having to go back and forth in time. What you do in the past affects the future, those kinds of things. It's this complex system, man. I think that is going to be the difficult thing to overcome for some. Do y'all want to hear the speedrunning tactic? I watched this speedrun of it this week, actually.
I'm curious.
It's not a short speedrun. It's still a fairly lengthy speedrun, which is interesting because it's a handheld game. It's a long handheld game, by the way.
It's a long game, yeah.
Like, you can't play this on one set of batteries. Like, you're gonna need a few. What is it? Double A's or triple A's?
I think it was doubles.
Double A's.
Double A's.
I think it was a tank.
Doubles.
So near the beginning, you have to farm for the right parts, for the right drops. And once you get the right drops, you evolve 2 of your characters, your 2 humans, into mouse-like robots. Okay. And then a short time later, you've got to you do this little hack where you overflow your money so that you've got infinite money for a short period of time. And during that time, you buy all the pills you need to upgrade them to max. And so you can immediately, early on, upgrade 2 of your characters to max stats. And,
game over. Yeah.
And it breezes through a lot of it. But leading to this, the next thing, some of these bosses are just sponges. They take so much time to defeat that it'd be interesting for us to talk about the battle system right now, because battle system is somewhat unique, but the fact that you're not left and right of each other, but you're fighting vertically where the enemies are these massive sprites, I found that interesting.
I like that.
Loved it.
It's cool.
Okay, cool. We agree on that at least.
Yeah, I'll say loved it. I loved it because it uses the Game Boy's space well and let them do these really fairly elaborate enemy sprites, which is awesome. I think that's the most important thing when you're having this fight, to like know your enemy. It also feels kind of a little first person-y where you're sort of behind your characters and over them. I will say it's a little bit of a bummer because you don't see their faces and they're moving around and they're like dancing and celebrating, and it to me it looked like, as they were wiggling and their weird legs, it looked like my party had to go like pee the whole time.
Because
they did a weird pee dance.
It goes back
I don't
to
need to see it. I don't need to see the face of my rock.
Right. It goes back to what we were saying, in that they give the player so much freedom here to like change these characters. They're just like, screw it, we're not going to give them faces, personality. These are just going to be tools that you use to beat the game. And I guess I respect them for doing that. And this follows through on that, where the focus is on the enemies. I liked it too. I mentioned it in the first play.
Did you guys notice the bosses being overly complex, overly difficult, having tons and tons of HP? I know, Nolan, you noticed the battle, or the encounter rate. You thought it was quite high early on, but I think also you got unfortunate. I
think it was unlucky because it wasn't like some of the others that we play where I was like, are you kidding me? It was more like sometimes you'd be like, seriously, I just took one step, but it was like a fluke. It wasn't a big problem. But the bosses, you're right, sponge is the word to describe it, because it's like, that doesn't need to be that long. You don't need that much health. That's insane. Yeah. That's insane. I've only beat one of them.
You do want your bosses to feel bossy, though. I would rather feel like I had to take a little bit longer and throw too much at them than have one of these bosses where it's like, that was just like a normal dude. Like,
I want mine to be sassy.
Feel hard or difficult. And so, I don't know. I'd rather... I didn't feel like they were too bad, but that's also because I did do the whole follow a guide thing this week. I didn't want to be lost and just confused and bitter because of that. And so I had some guidance on like how much grinding to do before fighting some of these bosses. And so I felt like they weren't terrible in that case. But if you didn't do some of that and just went into them like blind or with a rock that you weren't expecting, I could totally see them.
I was just laughing about that to myself. The rock is so funny that your character ended up a rock.
Yeah. Like, if I was an enemy boss and 4 rocks showed up to fight me, like, I would laugh. And if they beat me, I'd be humiliated.
Aged.
This game is on a lot of consoles to this day. I think that's important to kind of point out here at the start, so it started as Game Boy, which we all know is rough around the edges when it comes to graphics. I mean, not to say that there aren't beautiful Game Boy titles. There are. This one is on the freaking... You can play it on Switch. You can play it on Steam now. Wait.
Play it on DS.
Dustin, what happened? It came out this week or something on Steam?
Yeah.
They listen. Yeah. They listen to us. Okay?
Like,
Gaben.
It's either over and over again coincidence.
Okay? Unlikely.
It's either... It could be algorithmic.
Likely.
Okay,
maybe.
Meaning that like more people are searching for it, more people are buying or something, or it's deliberate. But
that's what it is.
Because this has happened more than once, more than twice. This has happened countless times, and I know we've been doing this podcast now for 6 years, so maybe that's a part of it.
Yeah.
But it was announced a few days beforehand. But this last week, I believe, the Final Fantasy Legends Collection was released on Steam.
All right.
And after it could have happened 20 years now. It could have happened for 30 years now.
Okay, here's option number 4, because that's too many coincidences.
Yeah.
Sure, we've got a good community, but not enough folks overall really to actually put a dent in any kind of major algorithm.
Okay.
Let's be real. I don't remember what your number 3 was, but I disagree with it. Number 4 is the more realistic conspiracies, and that is Gamma Girl is actually...
Gaben Girl.
Yeah.
Gabe Newell.
Switch the letters around.
Yeah.
He switched the letters around and it spells Gabe Newell.
It's conspiracy, and we're being used.
All I'm saying is I want my cut, Steam. Yeah. Like, give me... anyways.
Gamma Girl, I do think you're a real person.
Yeah, sorry. I do think, though, that it's interesting that series has survived to the Switch, to modern platforms and modern environments. So, just saying that's interesting, and we can kind of say why we think that is, but I had never heard of it, the Legend series. So, to me, it wasn't popular, but to some, it must have been.
Well, no, it certainly wasn't your Final Fantasy games. I mean,
it just got overshadowed by the main series.
It certainly wasn't that, and they were trying to hop onto that, but it was Game Boy, Nintendo DS, Switch. It's on the phones. It's being a Game Boy game. I think it's easier to port as well. It's easier to get around to some other consoles. But it is interesting that even this week, October 21st, guys, which we're recording on the 23rd. 2 days ago it came out. Okay, come on, really? Like, you can now play them, or you could always play them fairly easily. You can play them even more easily.
I have an idea.
Okay.
We randomly select Bloodborne this week, even though it's not 15 years old. Nice. And then it'll be released on Steam, and we'll be heroes, and then we'll get a cut.
I will never get a cut. They will not recognize it.
Yeah, we're not going to get a cut.
It is a handheld game. It is on Game Boy. That is a limited console that you're working with. On the sound front, on the graphic front, but some people were able to do exceptional with that. And I think graphically, this is one of those, because it looks like every other traditional JRPG, except it's on a handheld.
Yeah.
And that's so remarkable. I mean, we already talked about I think it shines most when it's in your battles, because that's when you see those massive enemy sprites. But that's such a smart way to handle the real estate that you're working with. Because if you're doing the left to right, more of a horizontal battle system, that's not going to look that great.
Because you got to have a menu on the screen too.
They're going to be they're going to be tiny. Yeah. But the way that they did that, keeping those character sprites really small where you just see the back, having the little menu, down at the bottom, but having that massive, they handled the real estate well, and everything looked exceptionally well, I thought.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a pretty game. And you talked about limitations on the sound front. I know there are people who just can't stand the way the Game Boy sounds.
Sure.
I get it. It's super limited. There's very few things they could do. It's, but I played a lot of Game Boy, so I have a lot of nostalgia for that set of sound tones.
I like it.
So at first I was kind of like, this Game Boy. And then once I got into it a little bit, it just like enveloped me and I embraced it and like let the sound like move through me. And I was loving it. It was... I did find the songs were a little short. I wish they'd been longer. I'm sure, again, hardware limitations there. But the ones that they were playing, I thought were relatively well done. So I didn't hate it, and I know some people do.
I agree.
Completely agree. What I wrote and what I feel like is like I thought the music was all good. I don't think it's anything to necessarily write home about. I never write home just in general, but it's all good and fits. You know, I don't think it's distracting. I don't think it's too piercing. I think what they were working with, they did really well with it.
Yeah, and one other thing about the visuals too that I was impressed by was the futuristic aspect. We talked about some of the sci-fi things that they chose to do. I thought they just the design of some of those rooms and the Talon itself and this, the in between area when you're going between time. I thought it all looked really nice. And again, when you're expecting deep fantasy stuff, it's just refreshing to see something like that. And I can't name many Game Boy RPGs that did a futuristic thing. And so to me, it stands out as just a triumph to pull that off on, again, limited screen, limited resources, whatever. I really liked that environment set of the game.
And circling back around to what Kenny brought up in gameplay, sure, if you want to get deep into these systems, yeah, you can play this game 20 different times in 20 different ways for 20 different hours each. Because there's just so many different ways to play with your party, to customize. That's what I was looking for, to customize your party. So many different ways. If you're interested in this, if the Saga series, the Final Fantasy Legend series sounds interesting to you, you've got Final Fantasy Legend 1, 2, and 3, which, as mentioned, you can, as of 2 days ago, you can now play through Steam. Come on. You've got the Romancing Saga series, and then you've got Saga Frontier, which was for the PlayStation, the one that I had mentioned, and others. This Saga series continued and found at least some purchase in the JRPG scene over the last 30-ish years or so. So there's certainly something there for you. If you want the Game Boy cartridge, a Final Fantasy Legend 3 Game Boy cartridge, you're going to be spending $24 for used.
Right.
You're not too bad. $200 for new.
A little bit worse.
Higher than I expected, but all right.
Yeah. Again, just play it on the PC now if you want, or on your phone.
You also need to spend $24 in batteries at least if you're going to be playing it on the Game Boy. So factor that into your budget.
Final thoughts.
At the end of each and every one of our episodes, we typically determine whether or not the game gets our vote for New Game Plus status. Since this is a director episode, we're just going to give our conclusory thoughts on the retro game of the week. We'll go through the three of us, and then we'll conclude with Gamma Girl's thoughts. She did send those in for us. I'll begin and just say that this is the game that Chrono Trigger wishes it could be.
You're trolling.
Well, yeah, of course. Chrono Trigger is the fantasy time travel, sci-fi mixture. That is obviously the one to look at. This does have some similarities in the sense of time travel, fantasy, sci-fi mix, but it's on a handheld. It would have been super cool to have a Chrono Trigger handheld title. That would have been super cool. We don't have that. What, Kenny?
You could go back in time, make it a reality.
So people have not actually been able to discover time travel yet, Kenny. So that would actually be impossible.
Then why are all these games about it?
But Final Fantasy Legend 3 might be something that can fit that mold for people that are looking for the fantasy sci-fi mix, Chrono Trigger on the go. Please don't misunderstand me. This is not Chrono Trigger. This does not have the same story and characters that Chrono Trigger has. It does not have some of that. But the fit and the finish of this game is there. I've actually heard from others that have played other Saga games that this is the best of the three handheld titles. And I would hope so. It's the third one. So, the most refined there. But they're also not connected story-wise. And that's the problem for me is is that, Nolan, you noticed it here, and you're like, maybe I'm missing stuff because I didn't play Legend 1 and 2. No, they're disconnected like the other Final Fantasy games are, and it's just confusing and convoluted, and there's a lot there. And so because the character and the story isn't there, the systems just felt so convoluted. They're robust, but they felt convoluted and thick and dense for me. And so I felt it to be quite challenging this week. And the Final Fantasy nomenclature is just a ruse because it's not a Final Fantasy game.
It's a ruse.
But it is a JRPG, and it's definitely something interesting to add to the conversation. What did you think, Nolan?
I thought that this is one of those titles, along with a couple others, that work, well, I'm guessing, just works a little better for Japanese audiences. And over here, we just can't grasp the depth of these mechanics, nor it's not super accessible, like objectively, just not, because there's a lot going on.
So Americans are dumb?
Yeah, we have Bobo Brain, if you remember last week.
Shout out.
So for us, it just didn't work well. And there are others like that, I feel. Dragon Quest, not so much, but it's kind of in that vein where, like in the earlier ones, it's huge in Japan. And for us, it's not that big, for one. And two, I don't know, it's just not as popular. Anyways, I agree with the Final Fantasy nomenclature. Don't do it. I think if Square would have dropped that from the title, not try to implement so much of the Final Fantasy things throughout the series, throughout this game, we might have had a more unique and standalone Game Boy title that would feel just better in general. I don't know if I'm describing that well. I just think it hurts it more than it helps it. Clearly, I don't know what I mean business-wise, because it does help it. Business-wise, because people recognize and buy it. Anyways, I thought it was a bit of a mess for me, just with the mechanics going on. I do like the story setup a lot, and I wish I would have been able to inject some character in there from my characters, but it's just not there. So those are my thoughts.
Kenny, read your piece.
Yeah, so my understanding is that this is a little bit of an outlier on the Saga Legend series, just different than some of the others. And so it's a little bit of a bummer because I'm curious about some of those differences and if the other Saga games are ones I would be interested in. But I think this one, whatever they did, it worked for me. I think it was a good introduction to the series for me. Maybe because of some of those differences, I don't know if I'd like the other ones as much. But yeah, the system complexity is a lot. I found it intriguing and kind of endearing. They could have taught it better, but this game vibed with me in some really good ways. It felt nostalgic. It felt thoughtful. It totally has that Square thing going for me and that Game Boy charm. And so I'm super happy that we dipped our toes into the Legend series with this one, and I could see myself replaying this game numerous times to try and get the full experience of all the different kinds of parties. And so yeah, fun for me, and I'm intrigued to try some of the other games that aren't Final Fantasy games in this universe.
And then our director, Gamma Girl, said, "This was the first RPG I ever played."
Okay, that's
so
a
fun.
big point there.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
One year,
So
my
fun.
brother got a Game Boy for Christmas. It was the first game system in the house. I used to steal it and
that's
hide
beautiful.
so I could play games on it, as
That's
in literally climb trees or hide under blankets with a flashlight in the basement.
Pause.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's why handheld is so sick, dude.
Yeah.
Especially for kids. I love Game Boy. All right, continue.
Yeah. Game Boy was me in the back seat of the van on a road trip.
On a road trip?
Yes, but I totally get that, like, climb the tree or find a space away from everyone.
Oh yeah, it's that play in the bathroom where no one knows you're playing before cell phones were a
On the
thing, and
toilet.
everybody was doing that.
So
exactly. It's so good.
Gamma Girl says, my brother loved the Game Boy and always got mad at me for draining the batteries. And inevitably, whenever he saw it went missing, he hunted me down. A couple years later, he got a Super Nintendo and let me keep the Game Boy.
Aww,
that's when I got Final
sweet.
Fantasy Legend 3.
Yes.
It was a beat-up used copy that I got at a yard sale, and my first play wasn't great because I didn't understand what I was doing, having never played an RPG before, but I figured it out and I fell in love. From the music to the story to the Talon to the concept of mutation, this game has always had a special place in my heart, and I wanted to share it with the world. I know it is technically called Saga 3 and wasn't supposed to be Final Fantasy and was remade later, but this is what I played and what I loved.
Gamma Girl, I love how 90s that review was. You know, like the yard sale, finding a cop. Dude, that's so good.
Battery draining. Sibling conflict, like it's all there, and we love it, and I'm so glad that you cared enough about it to want us to experience it with you. And thank you so much for giving us this game to play.
Thank you.
And it wasn't just the three of us that played it this week. We had many in our community that played as well. Some of you sent in thoughts and commentary on the Retro Game of the Week. Before we get there, we had 289 votes on YouTube, and 30% of them said, yeah, hey, play this game. It's worth playing today. 11% said, go play something else. And 59%, an overwhelming majority, said they've never played it before.
That's an interesting distribution. 30% says yes. Okay.
I think Game Boy, or 93 is a late Game Boy title. Yeah.
Yes.
This was 91, but it's still relatively late.
Yeah.
91. Yeah. I say 93 because that's when it came to North America, which is super late in the console's lifespan. Ward, one of our community members, wrote in and said, I remember playing FFL 3 with fondness. I was never able to beat it as my game was slightly damaged and would freeze when you killed the last boss.
Oh, that's not okay. That's just not okay.
That's messed up.
That's so,
But I clearly remember farming the simulator up to level 10 and breezing through most of the game after. Gave you a huge store of money too, enough to get everyone all spells and best in-slot gear at each new town. The Talon is so different than any other transport in any RPG I've ever played. It is practically a character in itself.
Yes.
Upgrading it and later traveling around with it, fighting with it, all awesome. Can't forget the 4 epic swords. Those are sometimes hard to find. Also, the changing from eating meat or installing parts, that was always fun to explore.
I love that they pointed out the ship as a character. I totally get that. Yes, I love that.
There are times where you get into random battles later when you're on the Talon, where the Talon will swoop in and unleash a barrage of missiles on the enemies you're fighting.
Game Boy game,
That's
guys.
Sick.
That's sick.
Right.
Sick.
Right. Game Boy game. Exactly.
Wow.
Garlisle said, I typically hate Saga games. They're usually fascinating in design, but painful to play for me. It turns out this title was willing to be more playable, opting for more traditional character growth at first, and making most of the more complex mechanics optional. Of course, playing with them is like stepping into a minefield and can easily blow up in your face. Lots of the non-human entities you can transform into are terrible, and with how little information about skills and gear is in this game, you'll want a guide open constantly. A bad match for a portable game. It's also held back by excessive text, slowing down battles, confusing directions, boring HP sponge bosses, and other tiny issues that add up, like being unable to equip gear unless it's in the first few slots in your inventory.
Yeah, I hate that.
Plus, while the story seems really cool in its intro, its non-existent characters and lack of anything happening quickly kill that enthusiasm. It's supposed to get better later, but I just didn't care too much to push that far. In spite of all that, I don't hate this game. It has its charm. I'd say Saga experience I've had and a decent Game Boy RPG.
The "it gets better later" line for any sort of media, it's rough. It's because it's like, well, I'm not gonna get there.
I don't know. For some things, it's like, hey, the second book's better, the third book's better, or once you get to the 5th movie, like I'll do it for a little bit.
Yeah,
but I've got to have something to catch me at the beginning. Something.
I judge that real hard. I feel like Nolan's that guy that like pulls his muffins out of the oven and they're still raw on the inside, and he's
Absolutely
just like,
not.
well,
Absolutely
I'm just
not.
eating them.
I'm an advocate for finishing games, movies, whatever, but when it's really hard to get to the end like that, like you have a road in games, you get a roadblock sometimes where you're just like, I'm not gonna do this.
And with two more thoughts, Dick Matchy said, when I first started high school, I was introduced to emulation by my brother. And believe it or not, the first thing on my mind was to play the Final Fantasy series again, as I had just found my dad's stash of PS1 games. And in that stash, we had Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. Okay. Needless to say, the hype I had hearing this treasure was going to be up for us to play was short-lived when I realized I wasn't in high school anymore. I'm 18 now with my own house, bills, girlfriend, dog, and work. I simply didn't have the time to employ my usual strategy of grinding for 20 hours in the first part of the game to just fly by the rest. With bosses that have seemingly endless HP and an honestly pretty bland and slow story, 18-year-old me simply can't give it NGP status.
And also, it's not Final Fantasy.
Yeah. If you are like, oh, I love Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, great memories, Final Fantasy Legend 3.
Yeah, that's a big jump.
There is something to be said, though, for grinding early in this game and it making it easier. Hit that sim.
If you stay as humans and mutants, but the moment you change to something else, all your hard work goes to the trash can.
You grind and you get there and then rock.
At least you can undo that choice. It's not like it's irrevocable.
I know. Or irreversible. Brojan said, I played the majority of this game at work on my phone. The official mobile port of all three games is excellent. Playing it portable on the go is important for this title, as that was what it was made for. Not every RPG needs to be 70 hours long and take 20 hours to ramp up. This is a good little RPG with some interesting mechanics in the species change and a flying time travel spaceship. What captured me is the Game Boy charm. It is amazing the sprites they can get on such a small screen, and seeing them reproduced HD on my phone just made me smile. Yes, the gameplay is a bit simple, but it is worth giving a shot, especially if you're into the Game Boy games.
Tell me why I cannot stand mobile games, but I love handheld consoles.
Mobile games today are very different. I feel like they're microtransactions.
Yeah, but even a port like an RPG would never touch on a phone. Maybe that's a secret episode.
Well, JRPGs on mobile was not the normative thing.
No,
that's not a normal thing.
Sure.
Y'all know that I'm a we play a JRPG, it gets picked, and I'm loving it probably. But this was a different experience because I'm not used to playing mobile JRPG games. It's a totally different thing. But for now, we're going to set aside this mobile JRPG, Final Fantasy Legend 3, and we're going to randomly select the next retro game of the week from our Retro Master list. This game we'll be playing for the next 7 days. Randomizing now. This game was released in 1991 for the Sega Mega Drive and Sega Master Systems.
I love the
Sega. Sega Genesis, of course. That's what we're going to be playing it on. This game, or a version of it, actually came out on tons of different systems. That's why it took me just a bit, because it came out on the NES, the Game Boy, it came out on Amiga, Commodore, it came out on so many different things. But the version that we're specifically playing is the Sega Genesis version that came out in 1991. It's a side-scrolling arcade-like game where players control the famous hero through various stages to bring down Big Boy.
The bad guy's name is Big Boy? The rapper?
The bad guy's name is Big Boy.
From Outkast?
And the character that we're playing is from an American comic strip who is a tough and intelligent police detective. His name is the name of the game we are playing, Dick Tracy.
Oh, wait. I know what that is.
I loved Dick Tracy as a kid.
There's a game?
It was one of my go-to IPs. I am all about it.
Well, so I used to have a cassette tape where I could listen to a Dick Tracy mystery crime.
Interesting.
Something. Yeah. That was my Dick Tracy experience. I guess we'll talk more about our Dick Tracy experience on next episode.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll save it.
Okay. Find a copy of Dick Tracy for the Sega Genesis and play it along with us this week.
Join us in Discord this week. ngppodcast.com. There's a button that says join us on Discord. You can do that and you'll get a warm welcome, and also we'll give you a free
emoji of your choice.
Absolutely not. I'm not taking emoji submissions. But join us in Discord.
No, not like add a new one. I'm just saying we'll throw an emoji onto your message.
Sure. Okay. Yeah,
we'll do that.
Yeah, that's all. We want to say a huge thank you to those of you who support our show on patreon.com. Obviously, a double huge shout out to Gamma Girl for being the director portion of this director episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. We had a bunch of new patrons this week, including Taryn, Christopher, Korgster, and apologies if I butcher your name, but Sajin. And of course, want to say a huge thanks to our producer level supporters, who are the following: Marley and Anthony, Anton and Austin, Ben, Bethany, Fox, Brunt, Carrie, Captain Protein, Dan the Man, DB Muppet, Francesca, Hi, I'm Josh, Joey, Jordan, Justin, Corey, Lorelai, Matthew, Mag, Mr. Lattes, Nawell, Secret Duck of Evermore, Shauna, Thomas, Unbelievable, Artanis, William, and Zion. And thank you to our director level supporters, Bro Jim, Garlisle, Zachary, and Gamma Girl. You guys are the best.
You're the best. Thank you so much. And again, I know Kenny just said it, but a big shout out to Gamma Girl for allowing us and supporting us in such a way that we were able to do this episode. You can follow us on our social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. All of those links are in the show notes. Listen directly on any podcast provider of your choice. Make sure you subscribe so that you are the first to get new NGP episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a kind rating and review. This episode was edited and produced by our good friend Tom. Dang it.
Wow.
Woo woo.
Autopilot much?
I'll give you one flub on that.
That was one.
You get
right?
one. Yeah.
You get one.
All right.
And then Dan edits you to make you look like a tool. All right. Forever.
Thank you to our new friend, Dan Willett, for the edit of this episode. Join us next week as we play Dick Tracy. Until then, I'm still Dustin.
I'm Kenny.
I'm Dick Nolan.
And this has been New Game Plus.